Almighty God, we thank you for the blessing of the Sabbath. We thank you for the studies that we've had thus far, for the discussion on the presentation by Elder Tess yesterday that was very helpful to us. We thank you for your leading and your guiding. We thank you for your mercy upon us, Lord. And we pray that all those things that Elder Tess prayed, that we would not take lightly these things, that we would not find humor in these things, but that we would see the seriousness of the times that we live in. And whatever may or may not affect us, may we see how it affects others and have the vaccine, Lord, within us, that we would have the empathy we need for those out in the world. May you continue to lead and guide us and bless us through this next review as we continue to see, Lord, not just what goes on with the people out in the world, but also the resistance and rebellion within your own people. May we be wise, filled with wisdom, courage, humility, and faith, and strength from heaven above, that we would remain on the narrow path, no matter where it leads, be faithful, and glorify thee in all that we do and all that we say. We thank you for hearing and answering our prayer, and we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Give me just 1 second. Okay, I'm gonna move on to harvest. Let me see if I have that one ready. Hold on 1 second, I'm not there. And in case I have trouble reading, I may need somebody to step inside. My eyes are feeling a little fuzzy today. Okay, so this follows what Luke just presented in his finishing up Davis Bull Warning. And this was harvest. It says part 2, but I think who wrote part 2 when I was looking at that, why it said that, I think it was just referring to the camp meeting that it was in, because there was no part 1 that I found, or that I remembered and that I found. So prayerfully that's correct. And this was October of 2020. So as we continue to go through our review, we can see we've made it from May to October. And who remembers what was the point of the reviews? Anybody?
Back then or now?
Yeah, now, the point of us reviewing these particular studies.
Well, we were tracing the history of how we got here.
Right. Why did we need to retrace the history?
Because we were missing some of it. We were connecting all the dots.
Yeah. I think of it as when the issue of pants first came in, what we were meant to grow into understanding was continued to be presented, and we, myself included, didn't understand the whole issue of feminism and radical feminism. It's like we had an idea of equality, but not to the extent of it. So,
and then when we,
no, go ahead.
When we went back to review it, we realized that she had been talking about it the whole time and we didn't pick up on it.
Right. Proof of the capabilities of my slow mind. That's for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of, I won't be seeing the chat because I'm gonna move that thing so you guys, I don't think you have any black spots because I think I remembered to remove that thing, but you can see okay, right?
Now we can. The black spot was there and now it's gone.
Oh, okay, you could, okay, maybe I didn't change it. Okay, so she started off with two particular questions that she was asked, and she wants to review and answer. And one of the first question is, where are we on a reform line? And what does that mean? If we remember right, back in Canada, prior to this, that was July of 2020, where she did tracing that reform line and where we are. And she gave 5 different lines to show where we are in each of those different lines. So where we are on a reform line and what that means for what is happening externally and internally in the past, right now, and what we should expect. And number 2 was the nature of the Sunday law. Many people are struggling with the statement that there is no literal national Sunday law. So it may seem that these two are very disconnected questions, but if you go to the line of the 144,000, you would understand that we are in the increase of knowledge of the Sunday law, and without further understanding the subject of equality, it's impossible to answer the second question about the Sunday law. It's actually hard to answer the two questions without blending them somewhat. So being in the increase of knowledge of the Sunday law, we don't have that line up here. So being in an increase, it would be this little line right here, it'd be the 144,000. We saw 2019 and 2021, and this particular study we're right about in here. So as we answer these questions, I'm reviewing the studies that have been presented in Australia since May. So I'm making an assumption about my audience. I'm assuming I am speaking to the people who have watched these presentations. There's 3 groups: those who have not watched, some of those who have watched but have bad memories, like I do, and myself included, those who watched and have very good memories and they remember. I'm speaking to that middle group. You've watched, but you forgot. So the studies that we are reviewing are nearly 6 months now, and they're not a thorough review. In the last presentation, we used this study of the nature of man, some, and the assumption is that people actually understand that study, so we can just refer to the nature of man as evidence for what we're building upon. We are building upon what was previously established. So this is not a replacement where I'm saying you don't have to watch those studies. If you haven't, your faith will be small. You may not have confidence in what is being said. And that's just a consistent problem that we have in trying to convince people of the truth when they're not watching presentations. The Apis Bull is the title of the first in that series, and it was the beginning point of that series that we built upon. We reviewed it in the last presentation. That's what the 2 presentations that Luke just did. And we saw that when it comes to idolatry, you have the form of it and the character of it, or the spirit, the mindset of inequality. So ancient Israel, they removed from themselves the form of idolatry, but they held on to the spirit of it. And when Christ came, hold on 1 second. Close the door for a minute. And when Christ came, he stood as a symbol of the king and the kingdom. And their understanding of the character of God was so warped, the mindset of their king, that also impacted what they expected to see in his kingdom. And they saw nothing in that message that they could recognize or love. And hundreds and thousands of Jews who heard of Christ, 5,000 on a hill, you're left with a tiny group in an upper room because they had held on to the spirit and the mindset of paganism. What we discussed in those presentations is the mindset we have of evangelical thinking. And that's the sad thing to think about it when you look at this movement. She says that there are 5,000, talking about the 5,000 on a hill, and then you just have this tiny group in the upper room where we've watched the movement get smaller and smaller and smaller. So In 2018, the midnight cry arrived, also known as the loud cry. And what does the loud cry say? What point does it make? What's the message it gives to God's people? We'll let you guys think on that one. What message does the loud cry give to God's people?
It's supposed to be to get out of Babylon, but I guess specifically it would be about sexism and gender, right? I don't know.
I think you got it. These are people answering from the chat. That there was a warning or a close of probation or equality, come out. I'm going to go with come out, which is what Christine just said. Come out of what? Come out of her, my people, that you do not partake of her sins. Uses the language that everyone can understand. Come out of Babylon, that you don't take part in her idolatry, in her sin. So whether that's literal, at one point it was, they had to physically leave Babylon. For us, no one leaves something physically. In our reform line, it's spiritual. Babylon does not exist. The city was destroyed. So using the parable of what ancient Israel had to do, physically leave the walls of idolatrous Babylon, leaving back in Babylon the form and the spirit of idolatry, so they do not partake in her sin of idolatry. I apologize, I do have blurry eyes today. In the loud cry of the 144,000, the Nethinims, the world, are called out of Babylon. What they are called out of is apostate Protestantism. So the Nethinims are the world, they're called out of Babylon. What they're actually called out of is apostate Protestantism. So they do not partake in the form or the spirit of idolatry of apostate Protestantism. Before you can call people out of the city, what do you have to do? Anybody?
You have to know the truth yourself.
You have to first leave it. So I guess you could say that. You have to know it because you'd know it. If you know it, well, maybe not, you'd know it, maybe you'd stay. But you have to leave it yourself. You definitely have to know it. Were you going to say something?
No, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to leave it yourself. So God has this problem. He wants all of the Nethinims out of Babylon. He needs his people to call them out, and all of his people are in Babylon partaking in its sin. This is why Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the first part of Acts are all about the story before AD 34, before God's people go to the world at the Sunday law, before they go to the Gentiles. Because there's a lot of work God has to do before that loud cry calls the world out of Babylon, to have a people outside of Babylon capable of doing that, outside of apostate Protestantism. It would be a lot easier if it was just an idol in Adventism, and we could all say, just leave that figure in the church and come out. But the form is the easy part. The hard part of coming out of apostate Protestantism is the mindset that many people have been indoctrinated with since birth. We followed their teachers, their pastors, their conspiracy theories. Last year, I started addressing Jordan Peterson. Many people followed and liked him. He's made a comeback these last days, and his new series is all about religion. Suddenly, he has a lot he wants to say about God, but that was always incorporated into his message, his understanding of the kingdom of God. So we know that we have to come out of the form, but we also have to come out of the spirit. We have to get rid of the pagan mindset. And before we can help the Nethinims, we first have to leave it ourselves. And since we do know that this message is sexism, equality, and pertaining deep to the oldest and the deepest root, it is sexism, that we must understand it and come out of it before we can go on. And this is the loud cry for the Nethinims, to give that to the Nethinims. So before any disciples can go to the Gentiles with a loud cry and call them out of Roman paganism, Greek paganism, those disciples first need to be called out of that mindset. The disciples in this history and any other Jews they can reach in this history. So in 2018 came the call, come out of apostate Protestant thinking here in 2018. None of you were going to Protestant churches, but almost everyone, just like in ancient Israel, had the perspective and the worldview of apostate Protestantism. And we find that what apostate Protestantism particularly believes in, beyond their conspiracy theories, beyond their views of the medical establishment, beyond their views of religious freedom, beyond their views of capitalism, all of which we imbibed, is their views of equality. The methodology they use in inspiration to justify that inequality. So the what they mostly believe in, beyond all the other things, is this inequality. Make sure I read that right. Yeah, is this inequality that we have to come into equality. Many people came out of that thinking, but just as ancient Israel had this issue of the form and the mindset, the spirit, the form was gone long ago. They destroyed that golden calf. The form of apostate Protestantism is Sunday keeping. So a Jew in Christ's day will say, I'm not an idolater. I go to the temple, I worship no pagan god. There's no bull in my house. I'm not taking part in pagan idolatry. And a modern Adventist will say, my great, 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 great grandfather was an Adventist pioneer. My family has been Adventist for generations. We don't keep Sunday. We left that back in this history. And everyone knows that the sin of apostate Protestantism is their Sunday keeping, the physical form. And they go on and worship the sun every Sunday. And down here, they cannot recognize they have the spirit of idolatry, the spirit of evangelical Protestantism. But there are evidences of this all around. I have many friends who are socially conservative Adventists and acquaintances who are socially conservative Protestants, and the worldview and the warnings I am receiving from both are identical. One says we shouldn't be wearing masks. This is the control of the government. We shouldn't vaccinate. Be careful of the globalists. Don't trust the UN. The threat is socialism. The New World Order is coming. The exact same perspective comes from both sides. Socially conservative Adventists and socially conservative Protestants. In 2018, God called his people out of apostate Protestantism, and we found that we had to remove from their mindset, particularly when it came to the subject of inequality. So just as idolatry has the form and the spirit, we find that when we come to the truth, it can't be kept in the form and the spirit. And what we spoke of in our last presentation is that last year dealt with the form. We placed women in organizational positions as women as teachers, and many people left over just that, the form. But the spirit is harder. Many more will leave over equality in this dispensation than left in the last, because they may have been willing to change the form, but they didn't realize they had to change the heart. So we saw in 2018 or 2019, women who were put in places of leadership, got women being ordained as elders. And there were people that did leave over that, but those that came through still don't accept equality, and many more will leave because they still hold on to the spirit. What I have repeatedly seen is many men who give the appearance of believing in equality. They see the women that are vulnerable. They can see their weakness. They go to them and encourage them try to lift them up and get them teaching. All these vulnerable women. There was a very good article, those famous leading evangelicals, those men like the Billy Grahams, Jerry Falwell, particularly those who are leading pastors. This article was about their wives. So the husband gets up and he preaches, he gives a straight message from the book of Matthew, and everyone says amen. He has their respect. Then his wife is going to speak. It's a mega church, hundreds of people there. An evangelical will say they have great equality in this church because the wife is speaking. So there's equality in this church. They called them the warrior wives. And what does she speak about? Anybody remember what the warrior wives spoke about?
Their failings, their faults, their emotions.
Yeah. Going back to the vulnerable here, where she's talking about within the movement. They're going to talk about the issues that they had where they were vulnerable and they stronger. That's what this article was addressing. It spoke about what these women taught, but also interviewed them. They would get up and bare their souls, open themselves up to the people. They would speak about how they had a difficult childhood, and they have an eating disorder and body image problems. They would speak about their marriage, how they had a difficult time submitting to their husbands, but they found this book that helped them submit. How they had problems in their marriage and then realized that it was actually just all about them. It was their fault. They were the bad wives. They would speak about how they lost children, the postpartum depression they experienced, how people at church irritated them, and they had the victory. So they were warrior wives because they had victory in these things, how they had bare their souls of their sufferings and their trials. So what this article addressed is that the man gives a straight message, disconnected from himself, and he has the respect of the people. And what does the wife have to do? They interviewed these women and they acknowledged it freely. To even be considered likable, they had to show vulnerability and weakness. They knew that and they played upon that. So if they didn't have a story about an eating disorder or losing a child, some of them felt they needed to invent one so they would be liked and respected by the people. This is an issue I see in this movement. Many say they believe in equality because they look down at all these vulnerable women and they will say, I'm not sexist. Look how much I encourage the women to teach. So you got the man, he's looking down at the women. I encourage women to teach, encourage them to lead. My wife is shy, I inspire her. So he's looking down at the women. And then they have a boss. And I'm not referring to myself, not because it doesn't apply and doesn't happen, but they end up with a boss who's a woman. And all of a sudden there's a problem. Why do they find a problem? So you have the man looking down here at the women, encouraging them to teach and to lead, saying that my wife is shy and I'll inspire her, and all seems well, but now they have a female boss. What's the problem?
She doesn't act vulnerable.
It's because she's not a vulnerable warrior wife of evangelical Christianity. Good memory, or you understand. Memory or you understand, probably both. It's because she's not a vulnerable warrior wife of evangelical Christianity. No one ever expected Elder Jeff to show his backstory and his hurt to find him likable. Donald Trump has no problem looking down at vulnerable women. I'm not sure that that's supposed to, I'm not sure what that's supposed to be there. Looking down at vulnerable women. I believe in equality. Oh, and saying, it's probably, and saying I believe in equality. I care about you. But the minute he looks at someone like Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, what's his favorite word? And they're nasty. They're not likable. He doesn't say that about men because the issue with women is unless they are vulnerable, they're not likable. So he likes those women that are down here that are vulnerable. No one had that problem with Elder Jeff. No one digs into Elder Parmenter's past to feel they can relate to him before they like him. Many men are fine with this arrangement, and it looks like they're doing a good job with equality. And the danger is now we have women up here who are not vulnerable. And if they are, they may not feel the need to tell you. And whether this is in schools, no one ever had to have an elder, had to have Elder Gabriel's backstory before they showed him respect. Whether it's in local boards or continental leaders, unless there is an evidence of vulnerability, they're not liked. They want to make sure they're stronger than you're weaker. Then all can go okay for these men. And men don't always protest. Instead, I find the following scenario. Like a child in a store, they just lay down on the ground and they won't move. If I don't get what I want, I'm just going to lay down on the ground and make your life hard. And we are organizationally dragging them through this movement, and it slows things down. So you have the men that are okay with women being teachers and women being in places of as leaders. They're okay as long as they're the vulnerable women down here where he can still be the dominant. But when you have a strong woman who is not vulnerable or doesn't show her vulnerability, becomes a threat to the man. And what she's saying is the men then just lay down like a child and throw a temper tantrum or to just not move. And that's what this movement's been dragging through this movement, and it slows things down, makes everything go slow. So the work doesn't progress the way it needs to because of all the inacceptance of women, of women having the right to lead and being in leadership. So while people may complain, we don't fully understand the presidential election. One of the reasons that we don't is that your leaders have no time to study because night and day they're dragging people through equality. And that happens behind the scenes, but it's night and day. So the reference here to the presidential election, because this was October, this was just before the election. And all the issues, the previous study that I know I did talk about the election, and the next one one of the other ones coming up is after the election, and all the issues with the presidential election come up. And so while they're complaining they don't understand it, is because the leaders that they have in place don't have time to study because they're always fighting with these inequality issues with these men. It always makes me think of what this movement is supposed to look like and will look like, where we all speak with one voice, we all see eye to eye. And actually Ezekiel comes to mind, because in Ezekiel you have the wheels within wheels, but you also have, if you remember right, and I may not say this right, so correct me here if I'm wrong, but he talks about the beast that he sees. I think it's referred to as a beast or the creature. Maybe he says creature. But anyways, if you remember that, they have wheels and they move, but they all move together. Does anybody remember that?
Yes.
They all move together, right?
Right.
So if you were to, kind of try to picture in your mind, if you step back outside of things and look from the bigger scale, you would see God's movement pulling in multiple directions and people trying to be pulled along, but resisting and wanting to go another direction. But where it's headed is that everybody's going the same direction. And I think somebody else was going to say something. Was there somebody else going to say something? Okay. So I don't know if I explained that well. Hopefully you pictured it in your mind too, that a whole cluster of people are all going to continue to move together with with one purpose, with one message, one purpose. And none of the fighting will remain. But I also understand it that the that there's people falling off the path all the way till the end. Okay, so I don't say that to talk about the difficulty I have with time, because I can tend to talk about my past. I know there are women who can be helped by that. It can help give context, but I don't want any woman in this movement thinking she needs to show vulnerability to have the respect to lead. And the changes to the form, when you have women leading, it brings a crisis when the form has changed and not the spirit. So you may have changed the form. In this case, you know, wear pants, or in this case, there's women as leaders. But if the mindset is still in that pagan idolatry, you're going to have crisis after crisis. That's one of the reasons it's such a difficult year. It's because equality is far from being addressed fully. And this was 2020.
So in Ezekiel, there that you're referring to, they were called living creatures.
Living, oh, interesting. That's right. It's been a while since I've read that. Living creatures, thinking of the living testimony. I don't know.
Yeah.
Living is, there's a reason that word's there, as opposed to the dead, right?
Right. Yeah. And the living dead.
Yeah. So Christian, I think this is Christiane, had the first presentation of this camp meeting, and she addressed reform lines, the foundation of understanding our experience. We have laid out a structure that fits both ancient and modern. This is our dispensation, 2019 to 2021. And this, so far, the date was unknown. And I said publicly that we are here, past the increase of knowledge, and headed towards the formalization. This was where we were. We know that we're now in here. But this is where we were at this time, heading towards the formalization. What I want us to do is understand this dispensation through at least 5 different evidences. We have 2 on the board already, the Alpha and the Omega history. We're going to use the Omega history of ancient Israel and the Alpha structure of modern Israel. And in all, I'd like to address 5 different evidences of our dispensation. So the Omega history here of ancient Israel as well, or of ancient Israel, and then the Alpha structure of modern Israel. So we won't do them in order. I'll put them in their correct order for our next presentation. There's an overlap between these because some of them are telling quite a similar story. As we look at these, you may know most or all of the information, but when you're reminded about it and combine it, it's quite powerful in the view that it gives of our dispensation and how accurately the last months have fulfilled the expectation through the lines. So the 5 are the modern agricultural, the model of agriculture, the Omega history of ancient Israel, the Alpha history of modern Israel, the line of Christ or the priesthood, and then the line of the revolutions. So the first model, the model of agriculture, what do we know about harvest? Anybody, what do we know about harvest?
The question is, aren't we post 2021? But this presentation was back in 2020, right?
Correct.
So the reference is Elder Tessa's position back in 2020.
Right. I think I actually was saying we're here, but we're here. Sorry if I said.
Okay. Okay.
I think I did say it that way. Forgive me, my eyes are bad right now, but I knew we were looking at 2019 to 2021, but I've forgotten that brief moment and said here, but we're here. So
okay. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah.
That's on the recording too. So thank you for pointing that out, George.
Yeah. Okay, so what do we know about harvest?
One thing is that there's no new message usually in the harvest.
Right. One of the favorite verses is Proverbs 26:1, as snow and summer, and as rain and harvest. So honor is not seemly for a fool. To give honor, if you were to picture it as a king bestowing honors on an individual, the queen gives out the order of the British Empire. What the text is doing is saying that to have snow in the summer is not reasonable. It's not ideal. To have rain and harvest, it's not reasonable. It's not healthy. So this isn't saying don't respect people who you don't think are intelligent. If you're a king, you're not going to bestow honors to someone who doesn't behave properly. It's not reasonable. Of course, the point we want to take from that is the middle. What you don't want is rain in the harvest. So thank you, Christine, and for helping me to remember what I said there. My eyes don't move from place to place very easily, and I struggle to focus. And then I forget what I'm doing. Okay, so 1 Samuel 12:17. We're going to read Ellen White's commentary on that in Patriarchs and Prophets 6:15, paragraph 1, but starting about halfway through the paragraph. As so often the people are in rebellion, they are told, is it not wheat harvest today? So it's harvest time in Israel, and Samuel is telling them, today's harvest, you're all in rebellion. I'll call upon God, and he shall send thunder and rain, that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, what you have done in the sight of the Lord in asking you a king. So Samuel says he's going to call. They're in the harvest. They're also in rebellion, and Samuel's going to call and have God send thunder and rain in the harvest so that they can perceive that their wickedness is great. So we've already gone through and shown how when they asked for a king, that was Apis bull idolatry. It's not the form of it, but it's showing their mindset. And Samuel says, if you want that mindset, you're going to be punished by having rain in your harvest. So if you want that mindset, you're going to be punished by having rain in your harvest. So going to the quote, at the time of wheat harvest in May and June, no rain fell in the east. The sky was cloudless and the air serene and mild. So violent a storm at this season filled all hearts with fear. In humiliation, the people now confessed their sin in asking for a king. So in their harvest, they did get a storm. And in their humiliation, they confessed their sin in asking a king. They have shown they're holding on to the spirit of idolatry, of paganism. It's harvest time. And would it be the kindness or the judgment of God to send them rain? I think many people desire a new message in this time period. This time period here of harvest, many people would like to have a new message. They don't realize how dangerous it is. There's a test in the last dispensation they have not yet had the victory of. This test here in this last dispensation, they have not had victory of. And to send new rain would be to destroy the harvest. The painful work must be done first. So prior to November, here, we have the latter rain. We had the message. There's no new message in this dispensation. If there was, it would destroy us. It would be the judgment of God that would destroy the crop because we wouldn't be able to handle it. The reason we wouldn't be able to handle it is perhaps we haven't done so well in the last dispensation as we might think. So no new message in the harvest. And we're struggling because we don't understand what happened in the last dispensation. So,
Elaine,
yeah.
I have a question, Bob. If there's no, I know what I'm trying to figure out what you're portraying there exactly. If you look at November 9, 2019, and we're in the harvest, and I guess if you put on the set of glasses where you're only seeing the priests that are in a harvest, you know that there's no new message. but we know as the 144,000, there is an increase of knowledge and a formalization. Is that why that's there? Because inside that harvest, you're saying there's no new information, but you're also showing that there's an increase of knowledge and a formalization.
Yeah, as we go a little further, she's gonna say that there's a loophole.
Okay, all right. I mean, I'm just trying to tie it all together right now. So
Yeah.
I'll just let you get that far.
Yeah, because that's what she does. She goes on and says that there's a loophole, and I don't think I don't remember, but I think it's later on towards the end that she actually explains the loophole.
Okay, cool.
So and that's kind of what she's going to go here. So obviously we still have a Boston, Concord, and Exeter, a repeating pattern. So you know there's a message, right? And that's what Bob's pointing out. So we know there's a message. We see that there's an increase in knowledge. We see that there's formalization. So I'm suggesting there's a loophole, a way of escape from that idea of no new message. It's going to show there is a new it's going to show there is a new message. We will deal with the loophole later. I didn't realize that was Patreon. I was trying to slip in an eye drop while you talk. So for now, no new message. It's God's care for his people that there's no new message. We saw that it would be a judgment that would come down on them and they would be condemned for their rebellion. And I have suggested that it's because in the harvest, we still have the mindset. So we still have the mindset of the idolatrous mindset here. And when we look at gender equality, equality being the issue. So we've left the form, but we still have the spirit or the mindset. So the loophole, the message comes later. The loophole of the message comes later. So I wanted to make a point where I realized, make a point before I realized I didn't make. I know I beat up on the men. I think we're all familiar with Ben Carson, my childhood hero. Donald Trump put him in charge of housing. Ben Carson, he fights through institutional racism, not just in people's treatment of him, but through the redlining that affected his whole upbringing. I think we all know what redlining is, right? Everybody know what redlining is?
I do. Is there anybody who doesn't?
I do not.
The redlining has to do, maybe Christine can explain it better than I probably would. I would be doing it.
I'll give it a shot. So redlining has to do with real estate, right? So when you go to buy a house, the banks will only loan to certain people. So like they, in the past, whether I couldn't give you the exact years and such, but it was back when America was great, right? Quote. So they had maps where they redlined areas that included people of color. And those areas, they couldn't get very good loans. And if they did get a loan, they had really, really high interest rates. And so if you're in those red areas, only, it was usually just neighborhoods with people of color. And those people of color couldn't move into neighborhoods that were not redlined. They couldn't get loans to move into those areas. Does that help? Did that make sense?
Yeah, so that was racial discrimination.
Yes, and it was the banks were doing that, but I think it was pushed by politics and stuff like that too. I don't think it started with the banks.
I think it was pushed by politics too. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think so. But the banks extended it and used it against the people of color.
There's some.
Okay, thank
simple,
you. Yeah, I understand it.
Yeah, there's some simple YouTube videos too that if you want to see it, because they'll do it graphically, but illustrate to show it. I know I've watched a few, but it's been a while. So here you have Trump putting Ben Carson in charge of all things housing. So Ben Carson, he fights through institutional racism, and not just in people's treatment of him, but through redlining that affected his whole upbringing. So he's a product of this, what do you call it, a victim of this redlining as he's growing up through his upbringing. The system of housing,
So like even if a person of color had a great deal of money, there were areas that they had a hard time getting into upper class housing areas because of the redlining, and people would not sell them a house because of the color of their skin.
Yeah, and in his case, when he was young, it was poor. Dealt with institutional racism, affected by redlining, the system of housing that affected Black communities, the schools he had access to. He fought all against that to be greatly successful. He's become a good Republican. And what is his approach to all this suffering Christians? He turns to the Black Lives Matter protesters and said, it's not that bad. Look at my inspirational story. I had to fight through all of it. So you do too. So instead of wanting to help them, he just takes the attitude, I fought it and I became successful. So I think the phrase is to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do it. Instead of lifting them up, making their paths easier than he had to walk through, he sees them as lazy. They have the opportunities, he would say. I was successful. If they would just work harder, they would be successful. And he fails to show the care and respect to his own group of people. So I want to make a call. Yeah.
I know a lot of other people that I've crossed paths with who are not, Blacks they're just people of other nationalities, particularly whites, who will use that as an example and say, oh, there's no difficulty with the Blacks or with any other minorities. Look, they can be just as successful as anybody else. And that mindset is very prevalent, across different races, and I see that very widely because they use that as a excuse that the reason why people aren't successful. They don't point to the problems with the way the system is set up and the prejudices that are there. They just look at it and see that, like you said, they're being lazy. I just want to point it out. It's not just someone like Ben Carlson who has that attitude. That attitude is very widespread.
Yeah, I know I've seen it in the issue of racism, how it directly affects it. It's far worse, but the idea behind it is, why would you go through such suffering and then not have care and concern for others that have suffered that like you? Not having empathy and wanting to help others. So you can take two attitudes, the attitude of, they're going to have to suffer like I did and pull themselves up, or because of what you suffered, you could use your suffering to then help others. So I want to make a call to the women in this movement. You can compare and contrast two women, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and who else? Amy Coney Barrett, the notorious RBG and the infamous ACB. Two women, both of them have encountered institutionalized sexism. And this is going on to the point that she was using for Ben Carson for. So both of them have encountered institutionalized sexism. Both of them are going to do very different things for women. It's an external parable we are seeing played out internally. Because when those pastors' wives stand up and talk and open up about the eating disorder they had as a child, to all those women beneath them in the organizational hierarchy, are they trying to get the respect of the men or the women? Anybody?
I think just the men.
The warrior wives? I think they want the respect of the women. Because the men aren't even listening.
Oh,
But it's
yeah,
the
good
women.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Why
Yeah.
would they?
Yeah. But it's the women who are saying, oh, good, I hurt as a child, you hurt too. I feel vulnerable. So now you become this little support group. So now you can relate to them and now you can respect to them because you all suffered together. But the men aren't even listening. I feel vulnerable and weak. I'm glad that my boss is vulnerable, weak and weak. So I don't feel like there's a strong woman who's better than me or over me. They'll open up their vulnerability for the respect of other women. And you can see externally that one of the issues that they're facing is that there are women on both sides of the political spectrum representing two different mindsets, like RBG and ACB. They're going to go on to do different things. So it isn't just men who need to learn how to respect the women in leadership, it's also the women. Just like you see with Ben Carson, Amy Coney Barrett, you have two different examples, and it's a compare and contrast we should apply to this movement, how the women handle a woman boss. And from a distance, they might like me, it's never the boss, they might like me, it's never the boss who's over your boss. So they might like Elder Tess, because it's not the boss that's over the boss, it's the one who impacts your daily life. And women are battling their own sexism. The vast majority of women vote Democrat. There's a distinction between men and women in American politics. But there are too many examples of women who stand with Donald Trump. For the women of this movement to not take this as a warning to see the women who thought Hillary Clinton was nasty. So you've got two different mindsets. She's comparing and contrasting the two different mindsets, but as well for the women. Those that still think that Donald Trump is okay. That was probably the biggest shocker to me, is like, how can people be okay with it? It was one of those things I know I've talked about with my dad before he passed away in the movies that he would want to watch, but also prior to Trump becoming the candidate, but running, you know, when he had like 16 others or whatever it was, my dad he loved John McCain. And when Trump wiped through all of them, suddenly John McCain was an enemy and Trump was the hero. But what really bothered me is to see that women actually thought Donald Trump's behavior was okay. And they did. So the same thing you have seen, compare and contrast, she's bringing it into the movement as well. You have women that are also still sexist and still would be for Donald Trump, but Donald Trump as a symbol. When you're looking at this movement and how we would be, some of the women are still supportive of the sexist men. So we have no rain in the harvest in here, and we should be glad for that because we wouldn't be able to handle the rain. But as I said, there's a loophole, and we'll come to that later. We dealt with agriculture, this one here, then the end of ancient Israel. I don't want to repeat these studies. They've been done at length, but I do want to remind us, 2018, we have the triumphal entry. 2018 back here, you have the triumphal entry. I lose my place, sorry. We have the triumphal entry and everybody rejoices. At the midnight cry, how many people understand the test of the nature of the kingdom? How many disciples understand it? So at the midnight cry, how many people understand the test of the nature of the kingdom? At the end of ancient Israel, they didn't. They're all saying he's coming as king. This is a fulfillment of our hopes. So at the triumphal entry, they're all saying he's coming as a king. And it's a fulfillment of our hopes until they come to the upper room, August of 2019, the International Camp Meeting, where we lay the final blow on the nature of the kingdom. So they're all excited back here. The midnight cry comes, and then you get here where the final blow comes, and all of those people, thousands of them, all of those disciples, 12 of them who back here thought Christ was coming as king, back here, thought Christ was coming as king, have systematically seen their hopes destroyed. And in the upper room, Jesus puts the last nail in the coffin. We systematically destroyed people's understanding of the nature of the kingdom. That was a climax at the International Camp Meeting. We addressed the National Sunday Law and the complete understanding of equality. For Judas, that was too much when he saw Jesus wash the feet of the disciples, when he heard the words of Christ. The message and the evidences of organization caused Judas to recognize that he was never going to see the fulfillment of his hopes, and he left the same way FFA and Elder Jeff left. The midnight cry, people did not understand what we were saying. It was deliberately by God left vague. I think we were talking about that earlier, where we don't hear things plainly. It's left vague, two streams of information. Ellen White says that if Christ hadn't gone through the triumphal entry, he would not have received the attention that he needed to validate his mission. So the triumphal entry is when the attention is all on him and gets the attention that is needed, or they would never have listened. So it was needed to get the attention of the people, or they would never have listened. If he had come out here and said no National Sunday Law, inequality, few or none would have listened. It's not truly understood until the upper room, and we'll see there even not fully, because we know when we get into this, we still don't understand. They go through the painful division, the test of Gethsemane, and the apparent failure of the cross, all of which illustrates our experience between September and November 9 of last year, of 2019. So you had, on this side, it was Gethsemane, if everybody remembers that study. And then you have the cross of 2019, which illustrates our experience between September and November 9 of last year, of 2019. So that we can see that from the formalization of the last dispensation through to the shut door, it was perfectly illustrated with the end of ancient Israel. In our next study, we'll review the model of agriculture. We will review our understanding of the end of ancient Israel. It's been taught extensively. We will move through it quickly. Then we'll go to the revolutions, then perhaps two others. So to summarize, we're dealing with two questions: the increase of knowledge, where we are now, and the nature of Sunday law. Is built on previous studies. The last presentation, we spoke about Eden to Eden and the education we were meant to have without sin, that we are still experiencing, but now in sin. We're going to come back to that exact same topic at the end of this camp meeting. Then we address the form of idolatry and the spirit of idolatry. But here we say, come out of Babylon, my people, no literal Babylon. We have to come out of apostate Protestantism. We're not in apostate Protestantism in body, but in our worldview, in our mindset, just like ancient Israel, we have the mind. God has to remove us from that first. We addressed how difficult it is to change the mind, that the reason that this dispensation is so hard and so many people leave ministry or the movement entirely is because of that difficulty when they don't realize what the message of equality demanded of them. And that issue is being faced by men and women. So there is a message in this dispensation, even though the model of agriculture says there isn't. We're going to understand why that is as we go through these reform lines. This was a short study, so we'll go ahead and close with the prayer and then do discussion. Dear Lord, thank you for our blessings. Thank you for that you love us so much that you're willing to labor with us. Like Jacob finally realized, may we realize this fight is for our benefit, our blessing. It is not to destroy us, but that demands we stop fighting it. I pray for those in this movement fighting equality, not in the form, but in the worldview, in the feelings, in the spirit of it. May those men and women find the heart change they need, that they can be part of this upper room experience we're already in. Bind us closer together in your word as understood through your methodology. May we find ourselves every day having an increase in appreciation, an increase in love for your character that you're revealing to us, that we can see this message not as something designed to hurt us, even though it does. May we see the power of healing it can have. And I pray, Lord, you'll heal your people in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to go back to that last slide. Maybe the second to the last one. So to summarize, we're dealing with two questions: the increase of knowledge where we are now, here. And I don't know if she's talking here, let's see, knowledge where we are here in the nature of the Sunday law. It's built on previous studies. The last presentation we spoke about Eden to Eden and the education we were meant to have without sin that we're still experiencing, but in sin. We're going to come back to that exact same topic at the end of this camp meeting. Then we address the form of idolatry and the spirit of idolatry. But here we say, come out of Babylon, my people. It's no literal Babylon. We have to come out of apostate Protestantism. And we're not in apostate Protestantism in body, but in worldview. So our mindset is like that of ancient Israel. So the disciples had the wrong understanding. And when they come into this dispensation, they have to come to the right understanding. So God has to remove us from that first. We addressed how difficult it is to change the mind, that the reason that this dispensation is so hard and so many people leave ministry or the movement entirely is because of that difficulty. When they didn't realize what the message of equality demanded upon them. So in here, we get the message of equality back here, but we don't understand what it demands upon us. So we get the form, and now we have to leave the mindset, the spirit of it, and we do not recognize what it demands of us. And that issue is being faced by both men and women. So there is a message in this dispensation, even though the model of agriculture says there isn't. And so as we continue to go forward in the next few studies, we'll better understand why. Okay, open up for comments or questions. Thoughts? Anybody?
I like Troy's comment. Said that these overturning of laws brought my mind to the true Ezekiel 21:27. The counterfeit overturning these 3 equal rights laws. Just a thought, not saying that he's correct. He says he's not correct, but it brought that to his mind, the counterfeit overturns. So I'm going to read Ezekiel 21:27 to you. I will overturn it, and it shall be no more until he come whose right it is, and I will give it him. I do find it interesting because when you say overturning, is like they're overturning the abortion laws, they're overturning those EPA laws, which are based on climate change, which are based on one of the laws that God gave us in the beginning to take care of the world. We were commissioned to take care of everything we saw, right? The animals and the trees, and we haven't done that. And yet the Supreme Court is overturning the EPA's power, and the EPA is in charge of environmental protection. And the Supreme Court just overruled that, took away their power to take away, to take care of the environment. It's just mind-boggling that the Supreme Court has that power. Do they have that power to take away the power of the Environmental Protection Agency? I'm just floored. And then also, so what else? They're going to aim at the LGBTQ. They're going to aim at abortion, not abortion, I'm sorry.
Gay marriage.
Thank you, gay marriage and contraception. So all of these laws that we fought so hard to get, all of these rights we fought so hard to get, they're just going to overturn them. We fought hard for these, and it's just mind-boggling. Redistricting, right? The gerrymandering, redistricting for voting. We fought hard for those voting laws, for those voting rights, and they're going to overturn those. It's just, sometimes I just want to cry, and then I'm reminded that this isn't our world, you know. But I do just want to cry for all of the fight, all of that we have won. You know, those people before us have won by fighting tooth and nail for all of this. And it wasn't given to us. They fought for it. They fought hard. And they're just going to overturn it in just a few flippant decisions. I'm mad. I'm angry. And I just want to cry. But then I have to remember this isn't our world.
What were those women in the beauty pageant?
Right. Exactly. Just cattle.
They
And
were
the ones that
no. I mean,
the
they-
feminists who fought. Yeah.
what were they?
They were angry.
They were angry.
They were angry.
They were angry. Did you guys read that? I think Susan posted it before I saw that she posted it. The Time magazine articles. There was the two of them, but did anybody read the recent one? The one that was
Did you-
just, huh?
No, go ahead. Continue, please.
The one that was just before, let me see where I can find it first, because I have it in here in a couple places. Because there was quite a few. Maybe we can pull that one up. We have some time. If you guys want to go through that, the failure of empowerment, of the empowerment and industrial complex. You guys okay with that? Okay,
Yes.
I'm good with that. I would love that.
okay.
And it looks like there's several yeses. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. I read it during lunch. And I don't, are these the two that you sent me, Christine? Because I saved them, but I didn't look at them yet. So I'd get through the last
Yes,
three.
the two that we were talking about before, the future isn't female and anymore, and I can't remember the name of the other one.
But the Time articles, are they the ones that you sent me? Or the New York
The
Times?
New York Times, yes.
Oh, the
those are
New
the
York
two I
Times
sent.
you sent me. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Because I didn't look at the titles and I was kind of thinking about that after our discussion. It's like, maybe she sent me the New York Times ones. And I wasn't sure. Okay. So I went through both of the Time magazine articles. And this is the one that she did recently. The same author did this one, and she talks about the article. She'll reference it, so we can maybe go back to it and read it later. But if we want, I think I can make it bigger. Is that better?
For me, it got blurry, but maybe
Yeah.
it just hasn't caught up to it yet or something.
Yeah, it's getting better.
Okay.
If it's too much bigger, I won't be able to see it. If I don't have it on the internet, not in a document where I can control it a little bit better. Okay, so this was the same author, and this is the one she referenced two Time magazine articles, one by this author that was in 2014, saying that this is the greatest year ever for women. And then if I remember correctly, then Charlotte Alter is the one that went to the Supreme Court. I think that's the same person. I might have that part wrong, but went to the Supreme Court and expected to see protesters, and instead she saw people celebrating. I don't remember if Charlotte Alter is the same one she was talking about in that, but Charlotte Alter is the one that wrote the article in 2014 saying that this was the This was the greatest year for women. And maybe if we have time, we'll go back to that article too. So what is women's empowerment in a world without Roe v. Wade? Women receive more college degrees than men. Young women out-earn young men in some cities, and more women run Fortune 500 countries than ever before. And still, Roe fell. More women are directing Hollywood's highest grossing movies. Ariana DeBose just became the first openly queer woman of color to win an Oscar. And there's a woman playing Thor, and still Roe fell. So you got all these great things going on for women, and yet Roe fell. More than 60% of American women consider themselves feminists, including 42% of Republican women. More than half of American women say they prefer to work outside the home. The highest Gallup has recorded, that's a poll, has recorded in 3 decades of polling, and still Roe fell. How could a cornerstone of American women's rights crumble at a moment of otherwise expansive economic, cultural, and social empowerment? The fall of Roe exposes a crack in the foundation of mainstream liberal feminism that has dominated the past decade. This version of feminism, is it the fourth wave, has been preoccupied with individual achievements, feeling the feel-good symbolism and cultural representation. It has in turn paid too little attention to the thorny mechanics of federal courts and state legislative races. And that's what I put in the teacher chat when I posted this article, because what were we talking about this morning? When it comes to comparing and contrasting the the Millerite history and the Civil War with the abolitionists, you and Christina and Phil were pointing this out, that it was what was going on through the courts. So when you look at the success of the abolitionists, you did get the emancipation, freed the slaves, and it was progress going forward, as opposed to what we're looking at now, and it's all being done in the legislature and in the courts. So it has in turn paid too little attention, it's talking about mainstream liberal feminism, has paid too little attention to the thorny mechanics of federal courts and state legislative races. Many fourth waivers presumed that reproductive rights were basically secure. And I think that's something that Susan pointed out, that they're resting on their laurels. They've won the battle and all is well. Many fourth waivers presumed that reproductive rights were basically secure, and that therefore the remaining obstacles for women were not legal or political, but cultural and emotional. Every time a woman won an Oscar or released a hit album or got a big promotion, the refrain was the same: representation matters. So the women are being represented through Oscars, through hit albums. They're having success. And so this is the representation. Of course it matters. Of course it should be cheered. But somewhere along the way, many in the mainstream feminist movement convinced themselves that the soft power of cultural representation seemed as important as the hard power of votes and seats. Empowerment became not a means to an end, but the end in itself. Many feminists, particularly rich, white, well-educated ones, assumed that changing hearts and minds was the difficult part. In a functioning democracy, winning seats and writing laws would inevitably follow. But that's not how our democracy works. Nearly 60% of Americans did not want to see Roe overturned, including more than 30% of Republicans. The number of Americans who identify as pro-choice reached a record high in the weeks after a leaked draft opinion showed the Supreme Court was poised to upend a half century of constitutional precedent, I think. And yet the course of American history doesn't always follow public opinion. Just ask the 2 recent Republican presidents who lost the popular vote yet appointed 4 Supreme Court justices who voted to overturn Roe. Roe fell in large part because anti-abortion activists and policymakers better understood how power truly works in this country. So the anti-abortionists, Roe fell in large part because the anti-abortion activists and policymakers better understood how power truly works in this country. They didn't rely on the inspiring movies or heartfelt Oscar speeches or Twitter hashtags to advance their cause. Instead, the anti-abortion movement has been extraordinarily successful at getting conservative lawmakers elected at the state level. Mitch McConnell, all the stuff we've already been studying, right? Mitch McConnell used the hard power of the Senate majority to block a Supreme Court nomination by President Barack Obama, which in turn allowed President Donald Trump to appoint another anti-abortion justice. Conservative judicial activists selected Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health as a vehicle to prompt this right-wing court to overturn Roe. So let's see where that was. That conservative judicial activists selected this case as a vehicle to prompt this overturning of Roe. None of that was exactly the fault of mainstream feminism, and many feminists did sound alarms about the threat to abortion rights. Local reproductive rights groups have been organizing to protect abortion access on the state level for decades, while feminist organizations like Planned Parenthood, I'm not sure what NARAL is. Does somebody know what NARAL is? We can look it up later. We'll look it up later. And the Center for Reproductive Rights have been litigating to protect abortion rights, although some national organizations have been criticized for focusing more on national politics than state races. Emily's List has been working to elect pro-choice women at all levels. And now, in a post-Roe world, Democratic governors from Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan to Kathy Hochul in New York are the last lines of defense for abortion access in their states. But overall, the fall of Roe signifies that liberal feminists were outmaneuvered. By focusing on empowerment and losing sight of the nuts and bolts of political mechanics, they failed to recognize what McConnell and his allies have known all along. Only power is power. I am as guilty as anybody. In 2014, I wrote a piece that now strikes me as the apotheosis of mid-aughts feminist myopia, titled, "This May Have Been the Best Year for Women Since the Dawn of Time." The essay starts with this cringy hyperbole: since the dinosaurs roamed, since the pyramids were built, since the locomotive was invented, there's never been a better year for women than 2014. I listed reasons that seemed important at the time, but look superficial in retrospect. The success of Frozen, a handful of new women CEOs, Beyonce dancing in front of the word feminist at MTV's Video Music Awards. Some call this thinking girl boss feminism. Others tie it to white feminism. I think of it as the empowerment industrial complex. Whatever you call it, it now seems like I'm not sure what that word is, Shrigi, distraction at best. While the empowerment industrial complex spent the early 2010s debating the ever-changing contours of feminist soft power, anti-abortion Republicans were building hard power, seat by seat, state by state. In 2010, Republicans raised $30 million to gain 21 legislative chambers, including in many states that would go on to pass the toughest abortion restrictions. While online feminists interrogated celebrities about whether they called themselves feminists and what empowered them most, conservatives were amassing the raw power to pass trigger laws in 13 states. While progressive nonprofits through galas celebrating female inspiration, brands spent millions on body positive ad campaigns and celebrities partnered with NGOs to promote women's empowerment. The state and local organizations fighting to protect reproductive rights, many of them led by women of color, got too little funding and attention. While the left tallied the number of women nominated for Oscars and which top grossing movies passed the Bechdel test, savvy Republican operatives were carefully building a pipeline of conservative judges with immaculate resumes in anticipation of future Supreme Court vacancies. 2014, the year I dubbed the best ever for women, was also the year in which Republicans won the Senate, putting McConnell in position to block Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland to the High Court. The failure of folks to pick up the shovel and fight this on the state level is why we're in this position we're in right now, says, I'm not sure how to say that name, UFO, executive director of the New Georgia Project, a nonpartisan civic engagement organization devoted to building the power of voters of color in Georgia. I see that as a failure of the large influencers and culture makers and popular feminists to really flank state level activists. Flank is like one of the words out of the battlefield, right? For those that know wars. Is that what that meant?
Yeah, flank. Yeah, it's like the side, right flank, left flank.
Come up and hit them where they didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
I see that as a failure of the large influencers and culture makers and popular feminists to really flank state level activists. Hopefully I understood that correctly. It's not that cultural representation is unimportant. It's just not enough, not even close. Representation is important, but not sufficient, says Amanda Littman, co-executive director of Run for Something, which recruits and trains young progressives to run for state and local offices. Gender representation doesn't always align neatly with feminist advancement. Neither the first woman vice president nor the first woman speaker of the House has the power to change the makeup of the Supreme Court or change the constitutional right to an abortion. So it's talking about representation. So you may have representation, but you don't have the power to change the makeup of the Supreme Court or save the constitutional right to abortion. Of the record 147 women in Congress, 41 are Republicans, many of them anti-abortion. All the major national anti-abortion organizations are run by women. For them, for the first time in history, I think that's what Susan pointed out, all of the major national anti-abortion organizations are run by women. So taking us back to what she's talking about in Vespers, where you have where she's breaking down the left and what's wrong with the left, you have, I think it was in the study the other day that she did where she was, I get a lot of things confused and mixed up, but it's not just the old white men. I think that was in yesterday's presentation, right? It's not just the old white men. So you see all this different mixtures of people that are involved. And in this, it's saying all the major national anti-abortion organizations are run by women. For the first time in history, 4 women serve on the Supreme Court at the same time. Justice Amy Coney Barrett was key to sealing the demise of Roe. So not all women are on the right side of these issues. More white women voted for Trump than Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. This too was representation, and this too mattered. The Trump presidency exposed the faulty arithmetic at the heart of the empowerment industrial complex. The rallying cries of empowerment politics convinced many that seeing and being were inextricably linked, as if obstacles like wealth inequality, structural racism, and voter suppression could be overcome by enough feminist inspo. I don't know what that means, inspo, unless you're talking about inspiration. It's using, I don't know if anybody knows what she's talking about there. Gusto, is that what she's talking about? The rallying cries of empowerment politics convinced many that seeing and believing were inextricably linked, as if obstacles like wealth inequality, structural racism, and voter suppression could be overcome by enough feminist inspo. Anybody know what inspo she's talking about, what she's referring to there?
I'm looking it up, but I can't find it yet.
Susan says inspiration.
That's what I was wondering too.
Inspo.
There we go.
Informal. Something or someone that serves as inspiration or motivation.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to, inspiration.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay, so it's not enough. It's not enough. This feminist inspiration is not enough. You have to be involved in the nuts and bolts and the mechanics of the courts and the legislative process. You have to have real power. So the inspiring people, the going out and inspiring people is what actually helped us to lose Roe. Now that Roe has fallen, it's clear that women have bigger problems than representation. In a post-Roe world, many women's lives will be defined by new laws in their states restricting their bodily autonomy, not by someone's empowering speech at the Grammys. When you are forced to deliver children you didn't want to have and can't afford to raise, you may not care whether you see yourself reflected in the latest superhero blockbuster. Your priorities change. So back when everything was all okay and you didn't see what was happening, we're all okay, then all these inspiring things affect us. But at the meantime, they came in and blindsided the feminists, because the feminists were all about representation and inspiring others and feeling that that was good enough. And now with that failure, having our own bodily autonomy is taken away. It was a boiling frog situation, says Megan Winter, author of All Politics is Local. People didn't realize how bad it was until it was too late. And so despite everything women have achieved over the past half century, Roe fell. Now it's up to the feminist movement to regroup and recalibrate. Inspirational narratives are great, so long as they inspire people toward building real political power. Abortion rights can still be saved, but only if feminists focus their energy on eliciting allies at the state and local level. In a post-Roe America, that's the kind of representation that matters most. What's going on in the government? Political power, being able to control. I want to find where she spoke about the other article because it might be right here, make it easy to find. There we go. Do you guys want to go on and read this one too then? Any comments on the first one that we just read?
Just one. Yeah, on the last portion there. I mean, how can they save it?
How can they
That's what
save
they
it?
were saying. How can they have the desire now? How are they going to save it?
I don't think it can be. I mean, we're seeing it. It can't be saved. But she's talking about going back and recognizing where you're, which is what you would do in, in any given situation. Recognize where you messed up and where to go back and correct your mistakes. But when you look at the makeup of the Supreme Court, once you have the courts the way that you do, you're a long ways away from ever being able to fix anything.
That's true. Yeah, even if they could do the filibuster, which they can't. I mean, that was talked about this last week, but they've
Yeah.
got the two conservatives that are going to stand on the side of the conservatives to not be able to overturn the filibuster.
Yeah.
So, whatever they try to do as far as taking it to a vote on the floor, the the Democrats, the liberals don't have the votes because they've got 2 people voting against it. No, they're Democrats, I'm sorry. Manchin and Sinema,
Yeah.
yeah. So it would be defeated.
Anybody else before we go to the next article?
Elaine, I have a comment.
Yeah.
It just seems to me that unfortunately, I don't necessarily want to use the abject lesson of building your house on a sand, but if you have to understand that it's not like the article is pointing out, it's not because you have a woman in a particular position as a CEO of a company, or that they've been in a blockbuster movie and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's just all, I don't want to say facade, but that's not structurally, that's not foundational. And it's easy to have something, especially I'm in construction, so it's easy to make something look right, to make something look newer, to make it look like it's right. But when the test comes, it's going to fall because it's not built properly. And I think there's part of that ties into why the failure here is. And also the part of the failure, as they point out, is not recognizing where the real leverage, I'm using the term leverage, the real leverage is, or the power comes from within the governmental structure that the United States has. So
Yeah, she referred to that as soft power.
yeah,
Soft power. So then when you go to, she pointed out Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris, but neither one of them have the power to change the structure of the Supreme Court and all the lower courts as well. Who has that power?
well, it's defined by the how long a person wants to stay on the Supreme Court, because there's no term limits there, number one. Number two, it has to do with presidential appointees.
Yeah, the president. Yeah.
So, and the other thought that I have is just, to me, it's the saddest reality of all is that even when you look back at the Equal Rights Amendment, that was trying to be passed in this country, which never did pass, there were women who shot it down.
Yeah.
And it's shocking to me to realize how many women are actually on the wrong side of the line with these issues. And that's food for thought.
Yeah. So if you go back to 2014, actually beyond that, she was referencing back in the 2010s, the earlier on. And I think it can go beyond that as well, where you had the Federalist Society. She mentions in particular the Federalist Society and bringing up young lawyers to be prepared to be these far right judges. So they were doing all that work behind the scenes while women were celebrating their victories that, we're now CEOs at companies, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're winning Oscars, all of that, but there's no power in that. She referred to it as soft power. There's no power in that. So behind the scenes, the Republicans had been building up that true power. The power of the legislative and the judicial branch. And the women could have representation, like Kamala Harris being the first female vice president, but she can't appoint Supreme Court judges. She can't appoint lower court judges, and neither can Nancy Pelosi. Look, so you can see it more and more why they hated Hillary Clinton for what she represents. So this is the picture that, this was December of 2014, I believe, MTV Awards. Or no, this is actually August 24th. December, I think, is when she wrote this. Yeah, December is when she wrote the article. So this was August 24th, but December is when she wrote the article. So it's the end of the year, which means 'tis the season for grandiose hyperbole. So let's go there. Since the dinosaurs roamed, since the pyramids were built, since the locomotive was invented, there's never been a better year for women than 2014. That doesn't mean things were great for all American women in 2014. Actually, a lot of things really sucked. But not great and never been better is the rallying cry for a movement in progress, and that's where women have been this year. They're fighting for the wrong things. Think about it. Frozen, a sister love story, became the highest grossing animated film of all time. While performing songs from her 2013 surprise album, Beyonce quoted Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's thoughts on feminism in front of a live audience at this year's VMAs. For the first time ever, a woman, Mariam Mirzakhani, a Stanford professor, won the prestigious Fields Medal for Mathematics, widely considered the Nobel Prize of Math. Janet Yellen became the first female chair of the Federal Reserve. General Motors and American Apparel both got female CEOs, and Apple and Facebook offered to cover elective egg freezing for their employees. A 17-year-old girl became the youngest person ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize. But those are just the victories, and 2014 wasn't necessarily so important because of all the first or best. Instead, 2014 was characterized by loud, frustrating, and often unresolved discussions about justice for women that reached an unprecedented volume. We didn't necessarily win any of these battles, and when it comes to debates over sexual assaults, domestic violence, and contraceptive coverage, it's hard to know what winning looks like. But we fought them harder and louder than ever before. Take, for example, the ever thorny issue of sexual assault on college campuses. These assaults have been happening for years, rarely acknowledged and barely addressed. Interesting, you can tie back to Kavanaugh as well. But this year, we've gone from whispering about sexual assault to shouting about it. In January, President Obama established a White House task force to protect students from sexual assault and spearheaded campaigns like One Is Too Many and Not Alone to raise awareness about campus assault. In May, the Department of Education released a list of universities under investigation for mishandling sexual assault cases. And in late July, Senators Claire McCaskill and Kirsten Gillibrand led a bipartisan coalition to both Democrats, coalition to introduce the Campus Safety and Accountability Act to reform the way colleges investigate and punish sexual assaults. And that's just the government activity. On the ground, students have been staging protests to demand justice, like Emma Solkowicz, I don't know if I said that, Solkowicz, at Columbia, who is carrying her mattress around until her alleged rapist is expelled. Twitter has become an open platform for survivors to speak out about their experiences using hashtags like #YesAllWomen and Rape Culture Is When. The media missteps this year, from Rolling Stone's UVA debacle to the Washington Post column in which George Will called rape survival a coveted status, have been troubling, but they've also sparked larger, louder online conversations about how we treat sexual assault survivors than we ever had before. Have we fixed the problem of sexual assault on campus? Definitely not. Are we making progress? More than ever. Or look at domestic violence in the NFL. In 2013, there were 7 NFL players arrested for domestic violence, down from 9 in 2008. According to USA Today's players arrest database. These are the years with the highest concentration of recorded domestic violence arrests in the NFL. And this is just the women who called the police. Only 4 NFL players were arrested in 2014 for beating up their wives or girlfriends, but Ray Rice was one of them. When a video emerged in September that showed Rice punching his then girlfriend, Janae Rice, in the face, it sparked a massive dialogue about domestic violence and NFL codes of conduct. Ray Rice was suspended indefinitely by the NFL, a suspension that has since been vacated after a successful appeal. And the organization was under so much scrutiny that some were calling for Commissioner Roger Goodell to resign. Under increased pressure from feminists and survivors, including some using the hashtag #WhyIStayed, the NFL was forced to finally grapple with a problem it had long tolerated with an uneasy silence. Goodell hired 3 female advisors: Lisa Frail, a former sex crimes prosecutor, Jane Rendell, co-founder of No More, and Rita Smith, a former executive director of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, to help reshape the league's domestic violence policy. Since October, the NFL has announced multiple initiatives, including educating players and their families and updating its personal conduct policy in order to address domestic violence in the league. And the social media response has made it clear that the public is not happy with NFL players beating up women and continuing to play. Even players like Eli Manning and Chris Carter have participated in public service announcements to get the public talking about sexual assault. Has the NFL effectively addressed their problem with domestic violence? Hell no. Has there been progress? More than ever. Consider Bill Cosby. People had been whispering about the formerly beloved comedian's habit of drugging and raping women for years. There was even a joke on 30 Rock about it 5 years ago. In 2005, more than 10 anonymous Jane Doe victims agreed to testify against Cosby in a lawsuit that was ultimately settled out of court. And even after it was reported in the press, there was little public outrage. But when comedian Hannibal Buress mentioned the rape allegations in a stand-up routine this year, the public finally took the allegations seriously. More than 16 women have come forward to share remarkably similar stories, and many of them say they were drugged before Cosby assaulted them. Despite the years of whispered rumors, it was only in 2014 that Cosby's reputation as America's dad started to tarnish. Do we always take rape victims seriously when they accuse powerful men of assaulting them? Not really. Are we making progress? More than ever. This is her writing about how great it was for women. Yes, a lot of things, and as she's writing this, all of this stuff has already been taking place with Mitch McConnell. All of this overturning and blocking Obama of the judges, all of this is already taking place. And then you've got Hobby Lobby. Yes, a lot of things sucked for women in 2014. The Supreme Court's Hobby Lobby ruling was a blow to reproductive rights. We still don't have a comprehensive family leave policy, and women are still paid less than men for doing the same work. So 2014 has been a year of setbacks, indignities, and outrage. It's not been great, but it's better than ever. So in the 2 articles, she changed her whole outlook was changed in the second article in the events that have transpired. Yeah, I was going to ask Susan, you put Ray Caruth, is he the more recent one? Because as I was reading that, I was remembering that there's been a lot of them still recent that are beating their wives. Yeah, and that's the point, that it all started in it didn't start in 2014, but that was the turning point. That was the turning point in 2014. Anybody?
I go
So
back
much
to,
to- Go ahead, Bob.
I just want to say it just still goes all back to understanding where the leverage really is and where the power is, and people like Mitch McConnell and others, we could name a whole host of them. They understood where they knew that they had to patiently make sure that they had the right things in place, and they were doing it. They were doing it because they knew that they were going to get the upper hand for sure, because all the rest of it, as it's been described, is kind of like fluff. You know, it's out there. It looks like it's like you're working busy. It looks like you're getting a lot done. But when it comes to working smart, the focus wasn't quite where it could have, would have, should have been. And I'm not saying that to be critical. I'm saying that looking at it in hindsight.
You can kind of see a bigger, oh, go ahead, Christine, sorry.
No, I was just going to say there's a lot to, bring in a lot of different pieces.
You can pull back and look at it like a movie playing in action of, well, just the image of Beyonce up there dancing with the word feminism behind her. They're celebrating all their great victories. And their victories all being about, representation by women. And did not maintain, fight for, or hold on to the true power that was needed to protect the rights that were fought for by others that we let away.
I like what Susan wrote. She said, it's almost like Beyonce is really standing in front of the word feminism, or you could say standing in the way of true feminism, blocking it and not promoting it. So she was standing in front of that word, but it was more like she was blocking it, not representing it.
Yeah. I know I've been asleep. And as we were talking earlier, I pray to have the full vaccination of being ready and able to know what our work is, what it looks like. I mean, if it means actually going out, I think I understand that it's not even going to be like a door-to-door kind of thing, like we've always, been taught in Adventism. However it looks, I mean, does God just bring people to us? Because I think about how many people you can't even reason with them. There are many that you can't even reason with.
Right. And those are the right side that have already made up their mind.
Yeah.